Hello, and welcome to Ideas Live. I'm Karen Anderson, and I'm here with my co-host,
Anne-Marie Oomen.
And we're tackling a really important and sometimes difficult topic today, which is homelessness. And it's something that we all are aware of, and some may have even experienced, and certainly we care about it. So we have a guest who has experience with it and works very closely with homeless people. So I think this is going to be a really important conversation.
You know, it's to me it's a fascinating and very, as you said, very difficult subject, because when you are homed, when you have a home,
right,
you don't think much about what it means to be homeless. It's only if you've had some brush with that experience, or you have actually experienced it, that you begin to identify the people who may be in that circle, or may be struggling with that. And what I am fascinated by is the stories of the story. You know, how did you get to this point, and how often it's just hairline changes in life that tumble you into the situation. And I think that's something we don't think about. We always ask who's to blame, instead of looking at the way that life operates in these circumstances that can just send you into that place without any fault of your own.
Well, you mentioned that you had a brief experience.
Well, it's just it's a brush, really. But and this is many, many years ago, when I was in graduate school, and between the bad boyfriend where I had been staying and the dorm contract starting, there were 2 or 3 days in which I had nobody, and it was summer, and it was in a town that I didn't know well, and I was sleeping in my car for 2 or 3 nights. And I don't remember a lot about it, except I think I was somewhat protected by the naivete of my 20s. You know, it wasn't an adventure. I was uncomfortable and a little fearful, but I knew it was temporary. Yeah, I knew it wasn't going to last. And I had this contract. I didn't have any money to get a place, and I didn't know anybody to ask. And parking in parking lots and trying to figure out where to shower, those kinds of things became primary concerns, as opposed to being way down on the list on a normal day.
Sure.
But on those kinds of days, I found myself really concerned about, okay, how do I prepare a meal, because I can't really afford to buy a meal. You know, how do I get clean? How do I get the wrinkles out of my clothes so I can go to work? You know.
Do you think even that brief experience kind of sensitized you to that issue in ways that might not have been true otherwise?
Well, whenever I see a person, on the streets who appears to be homeless, and I think that's only a small percentage of the number of people who are actually experiencing homeless, but I tend to try to be a little interactive, or at least to acknowledge this. I think about it,
in a different way. Maybe.
Yeah, I do. What about you?
Well, I'm blessed to not have experienced it personally, but I want to mention a book before we go much further called The Death of Vishnu, which I read as part of an Eastern religions class at the college. And it takes place in India. And in India, many times homeless people live on the landings of apartment buildings. So on each floor landing, there's a different homeless person living. And the people who have apartments that open onto that landing take some responsibility for that person.
Isn't that amazing?
And that was such profound awareness for me. And it made me think, okay, if that were true here, if a homeless person was living on my back porch, and it was my responsibility to provide perhaps food, to pay him for doing tasks for me, some sense of awareness and familiarity, and friendship sometimes develops. And how would that change my attitude? I mean, we can't keep homeless people at arm's reach.
Well, we're coming from a position of privilege, whether we acknowledge it or not.
So that, you know, when you talk about a book that changed you, this level of awareness made a big difference for me.
That sounds fascinating. I think there must be more examples. I hope there are more examples in the world of that kind of automatic assumption that these are my responsibility, or this is part of my life. But I'm not sure.
Well, that's why we have a guest who knows a lot more than we do.
That's right.
All right, so we'll bring him in, and please stay with us.
We'll be right back.
Hello, and welcome back to Ideas Live. We are very fortunate today to have a special guest to discuss with us the issue of homelessness. And this is Ryan Hannan, who is the Goodwill Street Outreach Coordinator.
Yes.
Sounds like a really hard job to me. I'm so glad you're here. Welcome.
Welcome.
Thanks
for coming in.
Me.
Yeah.
Ryan and I met for coffee a few weeks ago so I could find out more about the work he does. And I think I probably started out by saying, how can you do this work? It seems so hard to me, but so important, really.
It is important, and you may look at it as hard work, and it is hard work, but in the realm of working with people experiencing homelessness on the streets, there's nowhere to go but up. So it's always a positive attitude, and hopefully it's a brighter day for somebody each day.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. One of the things that makes you so credible and qualified in this realm is that you experienced homelessness yourself. You shared with me earlier in your days. Can you say a little bit about that, of how that came about?
Yep, I have experienced homelessness in my life, and it began when I was a teenager. I had some difficulties at home, and I could no longer live with my mom.
Yeah.
So off to the streets I took, and I was there for a few days, and then I started to do what's called couch surfing, meaning I stayed at people's houses, slept on their couches for a while, and then I was able to stay with friends for a while. And then I went back to school in Elk Rapids, actually, and I stayed in a camper behind my friend's house and was able to finish high school, and so that was another wonderful blessing.
That was a blessing, wow.
Yes, and was able to, at the school where I was from, so that was a really important piece, I think, to keep it continuity.
What was that initial experience like for you? Was it kind of, I mean, when you were a teenager, was that kind of exciting, or was it scary, or was it, what have I done? I mean, what was?
It was a little bit scary, and really a feeling of I can't go home, I have to do this, so a little bit scary.
And you really felt like you could not go home, or you were not permitted to go home?
Both.
Both, okay, yeah. All right.
So it's a difficult situation to be in, and scary, and kind of the unknown.
Sure.
But I have a natural positive outlook, so I thought the best.
And here you are.
And that just describes perfectly what I mean by that. There's the hairline circumstances that tumble you into that without necessarily fault of your own. You know, you're just, maybe you're making perfectly decent decisions, and you can't muster the findings, or or there's some other circumstance that you can't be in home.
Or maybe it's kind of a spur of the moment decision. You know, I mean, I think we've all been angry enough in our domestic situation from time to time to say, well, I'm out of here. I mean, I'm not going to put up with this. I'm just going to leave. Well, then you actually leave, and it's really different than you thought.
And then you're thinking, then what? But oftentimes we have places to go, or friends to stay, or other families. So if you think about that, I didn't at the time, but I quickly did. So that was good. And
Yeah.
homelessness, like, typically doesn't happen overnight. People go through their resources until they run out. And if a solution hasn't come up, then maybe it's a shelter or to the streets.
Do you have, and I'm sure these numbers are really hard to come by, but do you have any idea what the percentage of people are who are homeless but doing that couch surfing, staying with friends, staying with relatives, versus those people that we associate that are visible or more visible who are on the streets? Do you have any sense of what that percentage is?
I have a sense, but we don't really know people that are couch surfing and staying with others. We don't have a really good handle on that. The kind of projection for the youth and school age people is like 500 in the 5-county area.
Really?
Yeah, in a given year, not every single day, but within a given year. So I'm sure it's more than that. That's just what we are able to prove, if you will.
Wow.
And then we think of like literal homelessness, it's about 200 or so every given day in the 5-county area.
200 per day in the 5-county area.
You would.
I just wouldn't imagine that. That's amazing.
Some are in shelter, and some are in campers and backyards, or on the streets, or tents in the woods.
You had shared with me when we chatted, there's kind of 3 kinds of homelessness. Where maybe people experience it once, it's temporary, it's brief, and they get back on their feet. And then others that it's a mid-level acuity, you said, where they need a little support, some resources, but it's more temporary. But then the people that you most often work with are the chronically homeless, who are I don't know what chronic, how long you'd have to be homeless to be described as chronic, but I would say for long periods of time.
So the definition of chronic homelessness is someone who's got a diagnosable disability and who's homeless for 1 year or longer continuously, or 4 times in 3 years, meaning they got housing, lost it, got housing, lost it in that time frame. So that's the realm that I work in. We think about homelessness as a big complex issue, but here's where we start to break it down into an actual solvable problem. So the evidence shows that most people experiencing homelessness will experience homelessness one time for a short time only. Maybe they come into the shelter for a couple weeks and they're able to get back on their feet. And that's the majority of the people that fall into homelessness. So the way we prioritize, we spend less of our energy with people who are in that situation and more energy with people that really need us. So we use an evidence-based tool that helps us measure acuity, and it's actually mandated by the state to use. So we identify the next tier, which is kind of the middle tier, who needs some subsidy and some case management assistance to get out and retain their housing. And then there's the smallest group of people who most likely are experiencing chronic homelessness or fall into street homelessness a lot of the times. And they are usually have co-occurring issues, and they take up most of the resources in our community. If we think about ambulance, police contact, emergency room visits, mental health care, and substance abuse treatment and or detox. So,
and those are some of the co-occurring issues related to mental health and physical health.
And what kinds of things do you offer them when someone is in that circumstance, like they're really on the streets? What kinds of things happen through Goodwill Street Outreach?
Well, the first thing I do is try to engage with them. I want them to feel comfortable with me or someone on my team and talk about their situation and how they got there, and get to a point where we can do an assessment to where we can measure their acuity and help start the path towards housing. And that acuity assessment helps us determine which path to go towards housing. That can be very simple and quick with a person, or it could take time. It could take a number of engagements or contacts. But I also want to make sure they know where they can access basic needs. Places to get meals, take a shower, offer them shelter if there's shelter space available. If they want to go to an emergency shelter, try to help them get to there. If not, it may be a sleeping bag and or a tent.
It's just so, it's painful to hear.
Yeah, it is.
It's sometimes painful to do. But at the same
Yeah.
time, it's helping to reassure that person that there's help available, it's going to be okay. We're here to help you walk through the process to get housing.
So how do you find them? Do they find you, or do you get reports, or how does that operate?
That's a really good question. It works both ways. So I've been doing this for 11 years, so I know how to find people, where they're at, and the new people that stick out. So that part's fairly easy. There's also, I've been doing this for so long that the community is aware of the program, so they know if they see a person, they can contact Street Outreach and we'll come find them and do that. Or they may show up at a place of help, showing up, presenting, and those places know to contact us. Or there's also a central intake phone line where people can call, and then if someone who's on the street or in the woods and has nowhere to go and they call, then the central intake will give us a referral to Street Outreach and we'll go make contact with that person.
How many are on your team? It's you and...
Currently, there's 2 people, myself and Madison.
Okay.
However, that's changing very soon. We're going to have a youth-focused Street Outreach that's beginning.
Great.
So we'll be able to serve 14 to 24-year-olds in a much more robust way. So we'll have 3 additional workers just for that age group.
So I am assuming, because that position is added, and correct me if I'm wrong, that teen and young adult homelessness is an issue in this area. That
is.
14 to 20-something years old is an issue. How do you find those people? They're so young, and they're...
That is a more difficult task. That's even the group that's been termed the hidden homeless. There's a lot of couch surfing. They're more difficult to find, but we work through partnerships with community organizations like the Third Level program, Child and Family Services, the Northwest Michigan Community Action Agency, schools, and then our normal contacts through community meals, drop-in centers, places where people go in need. So we work together and build a relationship, so we're able to educate and say, hey, if you notice someone in this age group that's coming in, please let us know right away, and let that young person know that help is available and how we can contact and engage with each other.
Wow, that's big. That's big and important work.
One thing I want to mention, you alluded to it, but there seems to be an awareness at the national level that that the very most important thing to do for a homeless person is housing first. That there's other issues which we mentioned, mental illness, physical illness, joblessness, maybe a lack of job skills, all those things, addiction. But they've discovered, and probably research-based, that if you get someone into housing, the other problems are easier to solve. Can you say something about that?
Yes, so it's been 20 or 25 years or so when the idea of housing first really was introduced in New York City with a man named Sam Sabaris. He actually was a street outreach worker, working with folks on the street, and then became a doctor and did all sorts of research. And housing first was, and it really was like taboo, and he was laughed at back then. Now it's common practice. So in 2010, HUD actually developed criteria for their funding to actually get down to the people that need it most. And really the idea is to get people into housing as quickly as possible. And when that started to come about, it was really encouraging for me as a street outreach worker out there working with people, because there was a huge gap between people on the streets and people getting into housing. And the people I worked with were suffering from substance use disorder, mental health issues, and things like that, but they were not recovering living on the streets.
Right. I mean,
haven't
it
seen
seems
anyone.
fairly self-evident that living on the street wouldn't be an atmosphere of recovery, but...
And it's not. So we think about housing first, and the idea is to move people into housing as quickly as possible and then wrap around services in their home to help them recover from mental health issues, substance use disorder, and things like that. But I think there's been stigma attached to homelessness and how people think that people put themselves in this position, or because of their issues that they're doing, that's why they're homeless, so they have to fix that before they can get housing or deserve it. And it's really The
deserve
evidence
it.
shows
See,
different.
I think
right?
that's a key word, because I do think this is one of those situations where we can blame the victim. If somebody's homeless, it's their own fault, and maybe, you know, too bad if they're suffering,
or
they
worse
did it.
yet, they want to be.
Yeah, and do people always want housing?
Yes, I've never met a person who wanted to be out there on the streets. Now, there may be circumstances and things that are going on that they're avoiding that appears to be like they want to be on the streets. And that's where some of my education comes in to other helpers is we got to find the angle that's going to work for the person to actually get the help. So it may be things that we're doing that's preventing the person from getting help. That could be a thing. Or maybe the stigma along with homelessness or getting help. We have to help break that down. But people do not want to be on the streets, and Housing First has shown that. If you offer someone housing with no strings attached, they go for it, and their recovery starts to happen.
How do we have available housing for homeless people here?
That's another question, very good question. Finding affordable housing is extremely difficult in our area. There's some of it there. We have to get creative and really, really work hard to try to find units, but we cannot find them fast enough to meet the need. So we look at studies done by Networks Northwest right here in our community that studies this kind of stuff, and they show that there are thousands of units that we're lacking as a community as a whole to be able to sustain our population and our growth. So we look at that, and it's directly related to the number of homelessness. It's really difficult. We talked about prioritizing our resources. So we have money that comes in that helps with subsidies and support for people, and we identify the next person basically most likely to die in the streets, and then we as a community work to get that person housed. And the last person we housed last week was identified in March as the next person we should house, and had all his documents ready, subsidy, and trying to find a unit. It took
April,
3
May,
months,
June,
4
July,
months.
August, yeah.
Are these generally units just for one person?
Yes, typically
So
one person.
You're not going to try to house 4 homeless people together. My guess is
If
that
we
might
can,
not be successful. Or
That
is
can be successful.
Can it?
It's not the route we always go. It can be
Depends
difficult.
on what's available. Maybe.
Yeah, what's available, and if people want to do that. We don't like tell people where to live or okay, you guys have to live together. It's we work with people in their situation and help them to what they decide, what they want. And so creating choice is a big part of this.
Some empowerment going on as much as possible.
Yes.
I remember reading some time ago about an area in Chicago developing what they call little houses. These very small 12 by 12 units that could be set up very easily in a little community if the land was available. Has Traverse City ever considered something like a little house plan?
There have been people that have looked at that, but we got to remember choice is important in this. We can't just create an area and put all the homeless people there, right?
Right. Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Of course.
But
That's
that
my
may
bad.
work for some people. Some people we're working with may choose that. Some people who aren't homeless may want to live that way, and that happens a lot. So that could add to the selection of choice of housing and definitely be part of the solution, but it's not the end all.
Right.
It's also difficult.
And I didn't mean to assume that it was only that. I just thought that an option.
As an option.
It certainly could help, and it would take private-public partnerships, I'm sure. It would take government involvement because we would need the land, we would need the zoning, the infrastructure like sewer pipes and water and electricity, stuff like that.
Sure, yeah.
And then after someone gets into their housing, then you continue with support services to address other issues?
There are other people that do that specific job, so that we call that housing-based case management. And there's
that's not you.
It may not be me, but what we'll do in street outreach is we'll do what we call a warm transfer. There's a specific
It's a great
process.
word.
Oh, it's
Warm
very
transfer.
important because we know the people. They trust us and believe in us, and sometimes change is hard for people, right? So we help make that transition as smooth as possible from one person to the next, and there could be some experience of loss for them, losing us as workers. Others, they could be great.
Or the community that they're with.
Yes, that is one of the biggest issues.
think.
You think of people have developed a kind of a a kinship on the street as a survival tactic, really. And so moving on to this next phase in life can be difficult. And so the more we can help that person to be able to engage with their housing-based case manager, the better it is.
You and I talked about some myths about homelessness, you know, and we've touched on a few of those here, but I want to come back to that you know, we can assume that it's their own fault, or that they'd rather live like this, or some other things. But you had mentioned some other myths, for example, that alcohol and drugs don't cause homelessness.
If we think about alcohol and drugs across the country, there's millions of people that use alcohol and drugs in a problematic way as well, that don't fall into homelessness and never ever will. And actually, the majority of those people don't even get treatment for it. The treatment is very, very small if you look at the numbers. So we really want to look at, we think about homelessness, and really it's a lack of housing. And the amount of money someone has and how much it costs to live doesn't add up. And it's not as simple as that, because we have resources, family, or friends, or people in our network, right? It usually doesn't happen just like that. People maybe have exhausted all their resources, and maybe it was a kind of a longer-term trek into homelessness. And then homelessness can be very traumatic for people, and really, the term was told to me, it does something to you, man. One guy told me one time. It can be hard and painful, and then social exclusion starts to set in. And that's really the path towards chronic homelessness. So we got to look at those issues and remember homelessness can exacerbate mental health issues, right? So people may...
And that was another myth. You said mental health issues don't cause homelessness, because lots of people have mental health issues, and most of them are homeless.
It never will be.
Yeah.
I can see how being homeless could create mental health issues. I mean, in terms of anxiety or depression, or
that whole idea of, I mean, the word that comes to mind is shunning. You know, the sort of shunning that happens with the homeless. I mean, how many times do we walk by people and not even, you know, we deliberately do the zero away. You know, like I'm on my blinders here. I don't see you.
Another thing that you mentioned that I found helpful was that people who drink and drug aren't doing it for fun and recreation if they're homeless. I mean, they're not, this isn't a party atmosphere. They're doing it to self-medicate for all kinds of trauma, maybe from their childhood, and then the trauma of being homeless.
Yep, that just adds to it. So people, we don't want to hurt, right? Pain is something we want to alleviate, and sometimes people get to the point where drugs and alcohol is the only way. And you think about being on the street and people not looking at you. Some people might say mean things, yell at people, throw stuff at them. So it really becomes a coping mechanism. Being on the street, people are in survival mode all the time. Their brain is stuck in fight or flight. And that wears down your immune system. It messes with your senses. It really is unhealthy.
Well, there was evidence right in our community that homeless people have been victims of violence too. I mean, where
they have big time.
They've been beaten up and robbed, and I mean, it's awful.
It is, and sexual assault among women is it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. It's really, really dangerous
They're
out
particularly
there.
vulnerable.
Even in Traverse City and in our surrounding area.
Wow. What is the ratio of, in this area, or if you have a sense of that, of men to women who are homeless?
What I've seen, it's usually about, there's usually 1/3 of the people I work with are women.
Really? That many?
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
Distressing.
Yeah, it is distressing.
Here in paradise, here in this beautiful community.
Right.
Here's the rest of the story. One thing I wanted, we need to kind of wrap this up a little bit, but one thing I had started to talk with Ryan about when we met earlier, and we didn't get to a fuller conversation, was what can the average person do to help? I mean, you think, okay, should I write a check to Safe Harbor or Goodwill, or what are some things that people can do to help?
Well, you certainly could write a check to Goodwill or something. It takes money to be able to do this. Our what we do doesn't generate income. It saves the community lots of money, and it's the right thing to do.
Yes.
But not everyone has the means to do that, and that's okay too. One of the biggest things I say is not to ignore people on the street. Don't walk by them with those blinders on. You can say hello and look them in their eyes, just like you may anyone else you're passing. That could be make a huge impact in someone's life, because that may be the only person that does that all day long.
Wow.
So that could be very, very helpful. There's also ways to get involved and volunteer. Safe Harbor, Goodwill, lots of places. Our community is wonderful. There's many places people can go. Central United Methodist Church, the Jubilee House, Northwest Michigan Community Action Agency, Father Fred, Salvation Army, lots of places people can volunteer and help out and give their time. It doesn't have to be money all the time. And then certainly educating your peers, talking to people about the realities of homelessness, and really try to humanize what homelessness is. It's people experiencing it, and a really good resource for that is invisiblepeople.tv. It's a nationwide thing run by Mark Horvath, who he goes around and he'll hand out socks to people, but he'll interview people living on the street and post their raw, uncut interviews online.
Wow.
And it's called Invisible TV.
Invisiblepeople.tv. Yep, it's one of the great ways to really humanize it, and that helps to be able to create change if people are able to see and recognize that, because homelessness is hard, and it's hard for us to acknowledge, and we feel guilty, and we don't think there's anything we can do.
We feel guilty and helpless.
Yeah. So that's a good way. And then, educating people about it, and then supporting policies that create more housing and affordable housing. It's really the way our economics are these days. It's not building affordable housing doesn't make money for people, so it's hard for developers to do that. And I've talked to many of them, and they want to help. They don't know how, or it's just too difficult for them. So ways we can help promote that, and then voting for people that promote ending homelessness, really, and helping people that really need it, because the myth out there of people are wanting to live this way or they're lazy is really, really unfounded. So look for people that would promote policy that would actually help people.
Wow.
Those are good ways.
Thank you so much. Is there one last question I have that I've wondered about? Safe Harbor is a place for people during the winter months. Where can people go during the day? I mean, we see them at the public library or downtown at various stores and so forth. Are there other meeting places where people can go? People can go to the Central United Methodist Church downtown in the mornings. They have breakfast and showers. And then during the week in the midday, a place called the Jubilee House, which is run by the Grace Episcopal Church. Those are our places. And then there's community meals. Almost every meal is covered in our community. There's only Monday night and Wednesday night are the only times you can't get a meal. So those are some places. Is that a need, though, for a place to just hang out, a place to go and just read or watch television or use a computer, or do those exist? Those exist. The Jubilee House and Central Church both have TVs. The Jubilee House has computers. The library has computers. So those places do exist in our community, and they're helpful when you think about being able to connect. The library particularly. It's a wonderful place, and people are able to do the things they need to. Increase times for that would be helpful. Yes, right.
Wow. Yeah, that's. I wonder if you could briefly tell us one of your best experiences in this whole 11 to 14 years you've been associated. One of the shining moments. I've had so many. Really? Of them, yeah. It's so reassuring to hear that. Is. Yeah. The people I work with on the street are some of the wonderful, most resilient people you could see, and a lot of times the people that sometimes other agencies or the service industry deems service resistant, people who aren't working with you, and maybe they may appear cranky and complaining all the time, and even yelling at you, right? But if you listen to what they're saying, there's some truth into what they're saying, and we have to look at, what am I doing
that's causing this person to feel this way. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe I'm just not listening. They may have had a bad day all day long. But in those people, I have wonderful experiences with. And so one particular lady she even had adult protective services. She was deeming like she couldn't take care of herself. She wasn't doing things. And she wrote down, it was messy writing, and it was real big, but she would take notes and write down everything she was doing, what she needed to do, and she had it all right there in the folder. It just didn't look clean and pretty like the system wanted it to. And she is housed today, where it took a long time, and she just had to let her vent for a little while. And she will call me up, and some other people do too, on holidays, and leave me messages and thanking me for what I've done. Even if it wasn't much, just listening to what they're saying and trying to pick out the places where we can help to engage, because it can be very trying to go through all this government paperwork and meet this criteria and give your life story over and over again, all the painful parts, and your birthday, your birth certificate.
I didn't even think about that. You have to tell your story over and over, and yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
What an insight this has been. Thank you.
I'm so glad you're out there.
I am too. I'm grateful to you for your work and your story and what's happened to you. I think that's remarkable.
It reassures me to know the work that's being done, and I feel like I am so much better informed.
Yeah,
I'm so glad, but we need more of this.
We do.
There's more people out there than we can help in a timely manner.
Right. Thanks for the good work you're doing.
Yes.
I'm really blessed to be
pass that
able
on to your team people too. That I know this is really important, and giving us direction is probably the most important. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll be right back.
We'll be back.
Welcome back to Ideas Live. The little wrap-up portion of our program, our conversation on homelessness. I learned a lot.
Ryan Hannan, I'm just so grateful that people like him are working in street outreach, and I'm so impressed with, clearly he's a patient person and he's knowledgeable and skilled, but there's just a sensitivity to the issue there that seems to me is really critical to actually make that one-on-one contact. You know what I mean?
Yes, and the fact that he experienced homelessness, and he's so, you can tell. I mean, he's soft-spoken. He doesn't put himself first. That he would be a really good listener, and I think so often it sounds as if people, they really need someone who can hear them before they can help them, probably.
I think that's the biggest takeaway for me right now, is that we need to listen to and get past these absurd myths about, it's your fault, you put yourself here, all of that, and try to figure out how to actually make the contact and then make the contact help them. That's kind of my takeaway from this, is it could be any of us.
It could. And my other unexpected takeaway is a more sense of hopefulness. I mean, because he's optimistic about it, and he said he's able to facilitate housing for people and provide support services, and he sees problems solved. That's sort of reassuring to me. I tend to see just the problem part. And he sees the bigger picture.
500 homeless in a year. That's huge. I mean, that's in this region where we are so fortunate to have so many resources.
And the whole issue of youth homelessness seems also just heartbreaking. And I've done mentoring for years, and in two instances, there were high school young women who were in high school, and in both cases, either they were being thrown out of their home by their parents or had decided to leave, and I remember offering my house and then coming to terms with what that actually meant.
Right.
And I mean, you want to jump in and help, and I'm so glad that someone like Ryan knows more than most of us about what really helps, how to help.
How to help. It just seems like Yeah, that guidance for all of us
Yes.
is just critical. No, and I'm so grateful to know that Goodwill has this program. I wasn't even aware. So, and I also, the categories of homelessness and the invisible people, those are things I'm going to think about for a while. I think that's something we overlook, first of all, because it is invisible, but the invisibility also is I think a cape that we pull over ourselves or we allow to happen so we don't have to face these things.
We can look away.
I mean, what you said about the story in this book about the people who live on the landings and the lobbies, they are those people who have the privilege of a home in that housing or whatever it is are aware. They are seeing them. And to me, that's probably the most important thing, is that they are seen.
They are seen. They're people. They have a relationship with them. And that,
and
for Ryan to suggest, say hello to these people that you see.
Yeah.
Pretty basic.
Yeah. Years ago, I was on a street corner, and there was this was in Chicago again, and there was a homeless person behind me, and I turned just in time to see a woman clearly from inside the building dashing out in her suit, her business wear. She was very professional looking, with a Subway sandwich wrapped up, and just handed it to him and went on. And I remember thinking, oh, that's how it's done.
I could do that.
Yeah, you know. And
pretty basic.
yeah, sometimes I think that kind of seeing, you know, without any expectation of return, is also part of the story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, this has been very meaningful.
Yes, it has been.
Thanks to Ryan
And thanks to all of you for watching and stepping in and listening to Ideas Live.
bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.